Good morning to all of you. So we are taking today the topic on social movements. This is going to be the first chapter of your unit on social movement, and this is the first class I'm taking up through audiovisual representation, and we'll be taking up the basic concept, the basic meaning, the interpretations of social movements, and significance of the concept. So we'll go one by one, and I'm just trying to give you the preliminary concept of social movements. So I will not go very deeper into the concept. I will just uh, go point by point. So what is a social movement? It should not be an alien concept to us because we are beset with movements in almost all the societies, and no society or no state has evolved without social movements. Social movements are integral to the evolution of a society or the state. So our societies cannot evolve without social movements. We need movements to keep going on. We need movements to evolve, and we need movements to advance forward. So social movements have taken part in the evolution of mankind, and it has played a very great role in the progress of civilization, of human civilization. So we now have got modern civilization, and modern civilization would not have been possible if there were no social movements at all. So it is very essential for the modern fabric of the state. Social movements have to be carried on. So in the next chapter, we'd like to focus on the meaning. Or if you want to create an entirely new social order, then it will require the support of the masses, the support of the entire community, the support of the entire society, and there should be a socially shared demand for change. Now look at the second definition here. A social movement is an effort by a large number of people to solve collectively a problem they feel they share in common. So the feeling is very important. The feeling of belongingness, the feeling of collectivity is very important. Otherwise, a social movement cannot be waged. Otherwise, a social movement cannot bring about change. Otherwise, a social movement cannot be sustained. So a movement is called a movement, a social movement. A social movement is called a social movement if it is sustained for a longer period of time. So there should be spontaneity and there should be continuity for a very long period of time. So if a movement comes and goes, and if it is intermittent in nature, then it cannot be called a social movement. Social movement is always sustained, and uh, it goes on for a very long period of time, first of all. Secondly, um, a, now let us look at the first definition. It says that a social movement is a collectivity which acts with some continuity to promote or resist change in society or group of which it is a part. So there is a twist. In the first definition, there is a twist, and you can see that to promote or resist change. The social movement doesn't necessarily have to be waged to demand change. It may also be waged to resist change. So social movement uh, may either want a change or it may want to prevent a change. So that is very interesting, and we'll see in the next two features about this. So let us have a look at the next two features. So here we are, features. Firstly, the first feature is that social movements involve collective action as against actions of a small group of individuals. So it is basic feature, and it is evident in the definition itself. It is very much clear in the definitions itself that it is a collective action, and it cannot be an action of a small group of individuals. So it is a collective action. And secondly, it is designed to promote change or resist change. So you may either want a change forward, or you may want to remain the same. If you want to proceed towards change, then also social movement may be required. And if you want to remain the same, then also you may need a social movement. So it can be either way. So I would like to repeat, it is not a movement by a small group of individuals first. Secondly, it can happen either way. It may want a change, or it may want to remain the same. So it may be ways to prevent change. So these are the two basic features. Now we can go to the next slide. So when we talk about the types of social movements, basic four types we can find. In every phase of history, we can have these movements: migratory movements, number two, reform movements, number three, revolutionary movements, and number four, resistance or reactionary movements. Now, what is migratory movement? Before the India-Pakistan War of 1971, there was a large exodus of Bangladeshi people into the eastern part of India and into the northeastern part of India. So that was a migratory movement. That was a migratory movement because it uh, had a tremendous socioeconomic impact on both sides of the borders. So whenever there is a movement, there is an impact. There is an impact, and the impact has to be massive. And another kind of migratory movement we can talk about is that of the Keralites. The Keralites move out of their place to Middle East. The Keralites go in large numbers to Middle East in search of jobs, in search of occupations, and because of dissatisfaction with their present social situation in their native place. So that is also a kind of migratory movement. So migratory movements are a very happening thing, and they take place uh, in the everyday, in day-to-day life of the society. And secondly, it is reform movement. The second one is reform movement. We had a lot of reform movements in Indian history. We had the Bhakti movement, we had the anti-sati movement, we had the widow remarriage movement, we had anti-dowry movement, we had anti-child marriage movement. So we had lots of movements in Indian history, and these were particularly reform movements. In contemporary world, we can see certain kinds of reform movements. Particularly in India, we can see many religious movements coming up as a reform movement, and parallelly, certain reform movements are going on in other parts of the world also. Most of them are religious in nature, and particularly they have made impact on the day-to-day lives of a number of citizens all around the world. The third thing is revolutionary movements. Revolutionary movement is a violent form of movement. It may require bloodshed, and it wants abrupt change. So whenever a revolutionary movement occurs, it wants an abrupt change, and a revolutionary movement is generally waged against some form of government or some form of governance, like the state, like the established political order. So it is a violent form of movement, and out of all the movements, it is the most. It includes the most draconian measures. And coming to the fourth, resistance or reactionary movements. These kind of movements are reactionary because they are mainly fundamentalist movements. Um, they are mainly fundamentalist movements, might be religious, might be communal of any color, any creed, or any caste. And it doesn't have to be confined within a definite boundary. And reactionary movements uh, may happen across the borders, and it is transboundary in nature. If you want an example, then we can cite about the Hindu fundamentalists, about the Islamic fundamentalists, and there are also Christian fundamentalists. So these are religious fundamentalists, and they contribute to reactionary movements across the world. And the fundamental nature of these reactionary movements are that they are not confined to one country alone. They may not be confined to one region alone. It, they happen across borders. So here are some examples. The Lingayats in Karnataka for Sanskritization. The case of the Lingayats is a classic case. The case was represented by sociologist M.N. Srinivas, and it is a classic case of social movement. It went on for a very long period of time at the beginning of the 20th century, and they wanted Sanskritization. They wanted to elevate their community to that of upper castes. And around the same time, we had Rajbansis in Kuch Bihar and Jalpaiguri. They were Kuch Bihari, they were combined with the Kuch caste, and they were recognized as tribes. But the Rajbansis wanted elevation to Kshatriya. So it was at the same time, around at the beginning of the in the beginning of the 20th century. Then we had in 1968 the Naxalite movement in Darjeeling. It went on for around 10 years, and it was waged against a particular group of people, particular group of feudal people, firmly entrenched people, not against the state. And then we had SNDP movement, Sri Narayana Dharma Paripalana movement in Kerala. It happened in 19th century. This movement was a backward class movement, but it had many dimensions: political, economic, social, and it was one of the most remarkable social movements in Indian history. And we have got also All Assam Lekhika Sangstha or All Assam Lekhika Samaroh as another example. And they exist today. This movement exists today, and it was mainly waged against the supposed patriarchal domination of the Assam Sahitya Sabha. The Assam Sahitya Sabha. It was a parallel movement waged against Assam Sahitya Sabha, and the main complaint, or the main demand of this Sangstha is that they want an equal voice for women writers also. And according to them, their voice is denied at the platforms of the Assam Sahitya Sabha. So these are some examples of social movements. Now look at the origins or causes. Number one, relative deprivation. Number two, structural strain. Number three, revitalization. Now, what is relative deprivation? When a community feels deprived in relation to some other community or group of people, then it is called relative deprivation. So you should feel relatively deprived. You should feel relatively deprived uh, in the context of the wider mainstream society. So you should feel deprived in comparison to other classes of people within the same society. So the relative deprivation, the feeling of relative deprivation may come to both the marginalized as well as mainstream people. It is not that that only the marginalized people feel relative deprivation. No, the mainstream or the well-established classes also may feel deprived. Particularly, uh, if we come to India, then we can find this caste discrimination, and backward classes, the backward castes, the scheduled castes, they feel relative deprivation. And at the same time, the well-established, the mainstream, the upper caste community also sometimes feel deprived because of the because of certain provisions in the constitution, because of certain affirmative the reservation principles. So it relative deprivation is a psychological domain, and it happens in the psychological domain of a particular group of people. Next thing is structural strain. It is basically systemic. It is related to the age-old practice of a society. It is related to the cultural context of a society. Uh, so structural strain is there in the culture of a society. It resides in the system of a society. So an age-old institution or an age-old practice or an old society or the conservatives, they may support the structural strain of the society. So it is in the system. The third thing is revitalization. Revitalization is the consequence of the first two causes. The first two causes, relative deprivation and structural strain. And revitalization, the urge for revitalization can generate a movement. Revitalization means revitalizing the system or the revitalizing the old order. So these are the basic causes: relative deprivation, structural strain, revitalization. And you will have to go into the text. You will have to look over the text. If you want to go deep into the subject, if you want to go deep into the origins, then you'll have to consult the textbooks. But these are the main points so far as origins and causes of social movements are concerned. So regarding the significance, uh, yes, it helps us to understand how and why societies change. All societies undergo changes. In some cases, this may be radical in the sense that some social institutions may be replaced by new ones. So the significance of social movements uh, is that it is only through these movements, it is only through the study of the patterns and progress of these movements that we come to understand about the major changes in the existing social institutions. And when we study social movements, we come to know why the existing social institutions disappeared, like slavery, feudalism, joint families. So these are the systems that have disappeared from our society, and without understanding the social movements, we'll never come to know why these changes took place. And the second thing is that uh, through social movements, through the study of social movements, we come to know about the forces which operate simultaneously in the society. So there are certain forces always who which operate in the society to bring about change or to resist change. And when we keep on studying about social movements, we keep ourselves updated about these forces. And this is very much necessary on our part to understand the dimensions, the significance of social movements, because uh, those who are in charge of the social movements, they are always producing agents inside a society uh, to promote change or resist change. So as citizens of the world society, as citizens of the Indian society, and it is our duty to take note of the ongoing social movements and be attentive, and be attentive to the changes that are taking place in our society. So with this, I come to the end of this class, and thank you for your patient hearing. And in the next class, we'll be uh, taking up some theories on social movements. So a big thank you to all of you. Thank you.